Hi, I'm Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 104 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. This week, we're taking another look at my wonderful Amiga 1000 machine. You guys know how much I love this beauty. And we're going to be looking at the Parserio Expansion for this beautiful machine. Now, the Amiga 1000 has always been fairly expandable. Even back in the mid-80s when it came out, it wasn't too hard to find a 1 or 2 megabyte expansion card. There were some SCSI controllers that you could hook onto it to hook up a hard drive to it. There were a couple of accelerators available for it, but it was never as expandable as the machines that came after it, like the Amiga 500 and the Amiga 2000. Just nowhere close to it. And once those machines came out, the market for creating new add-on cards for the Amiga 1000, they just kind of dried up. Now today, some modern expansions work fine on the Amiga 1000. I did a video on the classic 520 accelerator. That works fine on the machine, gives it a nice 020 processor. You can use the ACA 500 Plus. Heck, you guys know I put my Vampire in here quite a bit and run this thing with my Vampire. But there are those in the community that want to keep their A1000s pristine and only running kind of period-specific software like Amiga OS 1.3. And I totally get that. I really, really do. They feel like adding retargetable graphics, 128 megs of RAM, super fast hard drive, and the really, really fast accelerators to a machine like this is just sacrilege. Now you guys know me, and you know I'm not in that group. You know how much I love my Vampire that I usually have in my Amiga 1000. But I really do get where they're coming from. I have wonderful memories of running Amiga OS 1.3 on my Amiga 500 back in 1988 and trying to find every utility on the BBSs or getting them on a Fred Fish disk that adds a little bit of supplemental power to Amiga OS 1.3. Like, who remembers the ARP library, Amiga-DOS replacement project, that replaced a lot of the background code in Amiga OS 1.3 to add features? That was some good stuff back then. So with this in mind, I want to introduce you to the beautiful Parserio Expansion. Let's take a look. Here's the little guy right here. You can see it is designed incredibly well. The color matches the Amiga 1000 case just about 100%, which is absolutely fantastic. Look at this tiny little size of the Parserio. Isn't that lovely? This beautiful expansion was created by David Dunkley right here in the United States of America, and he produces them in small batches. So what does this little guy do? Well, let's open her up and take a peek. Okay, now we have the guts opened up. He uses an 8 megabyte SRAM chip, not the slower DRAM, but the faster SRAM. So it's going to be able to access the RAM memory at about as fast as our little Zorro 1 bus here can handle. It also adds an SD card for using our little micro SDs. Now currently, a lot of them are restricted to 2 or 4 gigabyte cards, but he's working on an update that will allow you to use a larger card. And lastly, this little guy has a real-time clock on it. You can see the battery right there. So you're going to be able to use the real-time clock to set the clock on your Amiga. Now, here's a fun thing. Notice on these chips, all the fun names on there. Like here's Cyberdyne Systems Memory. There's a bunch of Star Wars references down here. There's the flux capacitor. So he had a lot of fun when he was designing this board and creating things on the silk screen. Now, one important detail about this review is this is a version 1.0 card. David is currently shipping the 1.1 cards, which add a few extra chips that make access to the SD card faster and will provide better capability for future expansion. And he does have a really nice upgrade option. So if you bought a 1.0 card, you send your card back and you pay cost, just a cost difference, for the new PCB, and he transfers all of your little chips over to the new PCB and gets you a 1.1 card for a really reasonable price. Now let's talk about how this little guy hooks up to your Amiga. Of course, the Amiga 1000 has, it's technically a Zorro 1 slot right on the side of the case, and it just slots right in there nicely. There we go. And when you slot that in, you tell me that that is not a beautiful, beautiful little addition to your Amiga 1000. Just nice color matching right on the side of the case. Now, as you may know, the Zorro 1 expansion slot is electrically compatible with the Amiga 500 slot. It's just the Amiga 500 puts it on the other side of the machine. So in theory, this card electrically would work fine in Amiga 500. You just take it, you flip it around, put it on the other side. But because of the height difference here, you literally have to put your Amiga 500 on stilts in order for it to fit in there. Now, the good news is that David has an Amiga 500 version planned, and he's already done some mock-ups of it. So in the future, when he gets a few more of these updates done, we will be able to get a version that's designed for the Amiga 500. That's exciting. Now, I'd already mentioned that this uses a 2 gig pre-configured SD card. In the future, it can handle bigger ones. This is where things get interesting, though. It does not use the fast file system on the SD card like you might assume. It actually uses FAT32, which is a pretty common PC and Windows-based file system. This is done to make it very simple to move files over to the Parserio. You literally just take out the SD card, pop it into your oh-so-boring Windows machine, copy over all the exciting Amiga software we want to on the card, pop it back in, boom, you're ready to go. Now, how does the Amiga see this Windows-based format? Well, for a long time, years and years, we've had the FAT95 driver available for the Amiga that allows us to see the FAT32 and the FAT16 file system. We use it all the time on our A600s and A1200s, a PCMCIA to CF card. Those are generally formatted in FAT32 files format, so you can just copy data back and forth between a PC and your Amiga. Works great. Also used a lot on when you have a USB socket on your Amiga to put in flash drives, and then it can read it in the FAT32 format. Another interesting thing about the SD card solution is that it's not auto booting. That means just like we had to do with Workbench 1.2 back in the day, is we'd have to initiate the boot of the Amiga from the floppy drive, and then it will pass over control of the Amiga to the hard drive. But you gotta have a floppy in there for it to actually start the boot process. This is not something we're used to in modern times on the Amiga. As a matter of fact, it's not something we're used to since about 1987. I can't think of too many modern expansions that have mass storage that are not auto booting. Now, I kind of get it on an Amiga 1000. You know, it doesn't have a kickstart in ROM, so we've always had to boot to the kickstart 1.2 or 1.3 floppy. Then we could boot to our Workbench disk. But there are a lot of solutions for the Amiga 1000s that are still available today that lets you add a physical ROM to your machine. And there's a lot of accelerators that let you flash semi-permanently a ROM right to your accelerator or your expansion, and it can read that as a kickstart. I do also have to admit that all of the other expansions I use on my Amiga 1000, they all have kickstart solutions. They all have auto booting hard drives. So in some ways, this does feel like a step backwards. Now, David addresses this by providing a boot floppy with every Parserio that he sells. Now, this is kind of cool because this contains both the Kickstart 1.3 ROM image, and it contains a rudimentary Workbench image that allows it to boot, and as it boots, it passes control onto the SD card. It actually works pretty well. This floppy also contains all the real-time clock software, all the software required to read the FAT32 file system, and everything else that the Amiga might need to get up and running with a Parserio card. Let's just take a quick look at the actual boot process. So I've got the Amiga 1000 completely turned off, got the floppy in here, I've got the Parserio on the side of the machine. Power this little guy up, and we'll see about how long it takes. About 10 seconds, we hear the little boot sound from the Amiga 1000. Then the floppy starts reading here. And this is the procedure where it's loading the kickstart into the writable control store inside the Amiga 1000. Now in a second, we're going to see our beautiful blue boot screen where it initiates the Workbench 1.3 boot from floppy. Here we go. Now it's reading in the startup sequence, and it's going to start passing over control to the Parserio. There it is, real-time clock. And a couple more seconds and we will be booted. Just wanted you to realistically see what you can expect for a boot time from your machine without the auto boot features. So now that it's passed on control to the SD card, we're golden, right? Not quite. You still need the floppy disk in there on every reboot. Even if you do an Amiga control, sure, it keeps Kickstart loaded in the writable control store, but it loses all of its assigns and it can't just reboot into Amiga OS 1.3. You still need the floppy to boot that. Now, reboots are faster because it doesn't have to reload Kickstart, but you can see why we need the auto booting feature. Now, once she's booted, you can see that the SD card works just like any other hard drive in here. It's actually quite zippy as we're zooming around in here and taking a look at some of the features of the Amiga. Everything opens up nice and fast, just like you'd expect it from a hard drive, without having to access the floppy at all. Now, I suppose you could use something like the hard drive toolbox that's available for 1.3 to partition this SD card into other partition size. There's no real reason you can't. I'm not doing it because this is a loaner card for me. You see it comes up here, SD card. This one's actually formatted for 4 gigs, which is the theoretical maximum. Let's head on over to the floppy and let's take a look at how the startup sequence allows it to boot from the floppy and then pass information over to the hard drive, pass control over to the hard drive. We're going to open up startup sequence. So this is the startup sequence that comes on the floppy disk. See, it mounts SD0 here. Now it grabs that from what's called a mount list, which is a slightly older way that Amigas would use in order to access hard drives. You'd create the hard drive size in a mount list. That was replaced with the rigid disk block that came with late with Amiga OS 1.3 and then really took off with Amiga OS 2.x and above. Here we start to assign things. So we've mounted the SD card. We're assigning our C folder, sys, libs. Just go ahead and pop everything over and tell it to use that as the resource. Here we're telling it to load the time off the real-time clock. We'll talk more about that in a second. And show us the date, which is great. Now we add some buffers to DF0. We could also add them to DF1 if you've got one like I do. It finishes right up and dumps you right into Workbench. But let's go ahead and take a look at how the real-time clock works on here. There's a program on here that's called RTC, and it gives you information on how to do things on here. So if we do RTC load, it takes the contents of the real-time clock on the Parserio card and it sets the system time and date to that. If you want to set the time and date, real-time clock, and today is 08/08/21. That tells it that the date is set to August 8th, 2021. You do the same thing with time here, hour, minute, minute, second. Now you'll notice that this is in the American time format. Over in other countries, they use a little different format. But this card was made in America, so that's why they do that. And also, we pronounce the letter Z correctly over here. We don't say Z, so there are some differences. So you'll see all of the memories available here. We do an avail. It tells us that there's 512K of chip memory and 8 megabytes of fast memory, which is absolutely awesome, and the maximum that a 68,000 based Amiga can see under normal circumstances. Chip memory, of course, is always an issue with the Amiga 1000, since it's not expandable to 1 or 2 megabytes without some serious hardware upgrades. You see, everything works as you'd expect it to. Let's open up DPaint here, and we'll tell it a nice 640 by 480 screen. That opens up just fine. You see it's actually nice and quick the way that everything opens up because it's reading it off the SD card. And remember, the newer version of this hardware will actually perform even faster than you see here, which is kind of cool. You can see that the SD card loads things up nice and quickly into Deluxe Paint. And away we go, a nice Deluxe Paint image. Even with only 512K of chip RAM, fantastic paint programs like Photon Paint work absolutely perfectly on a machine like this. So we can go into our ham program here and take a look at, let's go to Ghost Floor. We're going to load the Ghost Floor picture. Pretty cool, huh? I remember working on this one back in the day through their tutorials. Fun stuff. There are an absolute ton of productivity packages that work great under Amiga OS 1.3 also. I put a ProWrite on here, which was my favorite word processor. I used this up to about probably 1994, 1995 or so. Did everything I ever needed to do as a word processor. And it works just great on the Amiga 1000 or the Parserio. Believe it or not, the Amiga 1000 with this interface also does fine running a lot of Whd Load games. A lot of people think Whd Load requires the newer operating systems, but it actually works okay with some games here. So let's go into our games folder and see what we got in here. Marble Madness. We're going to go into Marble Madness. Now notice we don't launch this from an icon. That does not work so good with Amiga OS 1.3. But you can launch things manually. JST game.slave. And that should, yep, Whd Load emulation interface, and it will launch Marble Madness here in just a moment. And away we go. Let's change it to mouse port, input device, mouse, and go. There's our lovely Marble Madness music. And the Whd Load version of Marble Madness loads just fine on here. This works with quite a few games. Not all of them, of course, but quite a few. Enough to keep you happy. Yay, I win. Now, Boat from the Amigos right here, and I have talked in the past about getting a comprehensive list of games that work great on a relatively unexpanded Amiga 1000. One of these days we'll actually get that project off the ground and make the list and test the games out. I'm thinking it'd be cool to have a list of, ones that'll work with just the 512K of chip, ones that'll work as long as you put a little bit of, fast RAM in there. And this would cover just about everything we need. You can also get the disk mimic software that our good friend Eric from AmigaLove reviewed just a couple of weeks back. Here's a link to his video right there. It's ADF software, mounting software that works under Amiga OS 1.3, which is actually kind of cool. Now you cannot boot from an ADF on a system like this unless you actually have a Gotek. It works fine with a Gotek. But for accessing ADF disks and installing software, use Disk Mimic, works great. Another cool thing is Hippo Player works fantastic on Amiga OS 1.3. So here we've got the Lotus theme song from Lotus 2 playing, mod in the background. Still multitask just fine, just like you'd expect it to. Tell me that's not cool, huh? Performance is as good as one would expect on a 68,000 based machine with 8 megabytes of very, very fast RAM and a reasonably fast SD card. It works fantastic. This is no vampire, nor is it meant to be. Now, I really recommend that everyone who already owns one of these cards upgrade as soon as you can to the 1.1 version, because that's going to increase the performance of your SD card dramatically. It's already pretty darn good, but coming in 2 or 4 times faster than what you see here, how can you complain about that? This really allows the Amiga 1000 to act like the machine that it was meant to be. Adding that memory, adding that storage, adding that real-time clock makes it a really, really functionally usable machine. And if we had this back in 1985, wow, just wow. So let's talk about the future of this card, because there's a very strong future for it. I talked to David this week, and he gave me the outline of his plans for the Parserio card. First, he's working on and is almost done with a TD64 compatible driver for it. This will allow us to break the 2 and the 4 gigabyte hard drive size barrier that we're currently dealing with. And believe me, when you're dealing with Workbench 1.3, 2 gigabytes feels like an infinite amount of space. I mean, we used to run these things with 20 megabyte, 40 megabyte drives. But with the 1.1 board and the new driver he's going to release in the next month or two, we'll be able to use 16 gig, 32 gig, or possibly even larger sized SD cards on here and have access to all that storage space, which is really cool. Next, he wants to make the driver RDB, or rigid disk block, aware, and that's basically going to allow you to have the drivers and the protocols for the SD card stored right on the SD card itself, and when the Amiga boots, it picks up that information from the card instead of having to manually load it from floppy. No more mount lists like I mentioned before, and the driver will be integrated right with the SD card, which will speed up the booting but won't make it auto boot yet. For auto booting, we need to wait a little bit longer, but hopefully still this year. He's working on a ROM IC that can be added to the 1.1 versions of the card and future versions of the card, which will add real auto booting to the interface. And that will be invaluable. You will no longer need a Workbench floppy to boot this machine and pass the boot procedure over to the SD card. It will just boot automatically. Now, if you don't have a Kickstart ROM physical solution inside your machine, you still need the Kickstart disk. That's just a fact of life. But there are so many options out there for adding a real Kickstart ROM to the Amiga 1000. Easy to do. Newer versions of the card also support a feature called Twin Kick, which allows you to use either a 1.3 or like a 3.1 ROM right on the existing machine here, which is kind of cool. Once he gets the auto boot ROM working properly, he'll be making an Amiga 500 version of this device, which will be just fantastic and opens up a whole new market for people who want some extra performance and extra storage on their Amiga 500. All these new features will need the 1.1 card, so please get your cards sent in to David if you have an old one. Get the reasonably priced upgrade. I mean, right now it's like $30 plus shipping. How can you beat that? And he'll upgrade it to the 1.1 card, and you'll be able to use these extra features once they become available in the next couple of months. And how much is this little beauty? I know you're asking that question. Well, normal price is $225. But if you mention the name AmigaLove or AmigaLove when you order it, he'll give you a nice discount down to $195 plus shipping. Now, don't mention my name or he'll double the price. So now we're getting the part where you're going to hear what I think about this board. To be honest, it is incredibly well built. Out of all the Amiga peripherals and hardware that I've purchased, this thing is in the top 3 of actual build quality. That case that he uses on the side, absolutely fantastic, matches so beautifully. I'm really impressed with the build quality. It does what it's designed to do. Add memory, add storage, add a real-time clock to your Amiga 1000, and it does that superbly. But it sounds like there's a big but coming, and there is. The card is quite honestly $200. Now that's not a tremendous amount of money in the overall scheme of things, but there's no getting around the elephant in the room, which is the classic 520 card that I reviewed several months back. That has a 68020 running at 28 megahertz. It's got a compact flash card that is really fast. It has an SD card that works just like this as supplementary non-bootable storage. It's got 8 megabytes of RAM, and it has the ability to load a Kickstart ROM right on the device, so I can just plug it in, turn it on, loads the ROM, boots up, auto booting, I'm golden. And to be honest, the price of that with a 3D printed case, about 200 bucks. The ACA 500 Plus, it's same kind of boat here. That's less than $200, 68,000 running up to 42 megahertz, although I understand most Amiga 1000s max out at about 21 megahertz reliably. Fast storage, the ability to store multiple Kickstart ROMs, the ability to add an Amiga 1200 accelerator to it to expand it even more, 200 bucks. So it can be difficult when you're comparing it feature to feature to justify the $200 for the Parserio. I understand that, I totally get it, but you have to think of it a little differently. So this is the other thing you have to consider. Look at this, look how beautifully that's designed. Just fits so snug and so nicely on the side of the case. No interference at all, it just becomes part of the machine. Where you compare that to the classic 520, which has to install backwards like this, you can see that's a nice big bulky thing that sticks out the side. Or the ACA 500 Plus, which is another device that has to stick out the side and is big and bulky. And remember, David's not selling these through any vendors. He builds them, custom builds them as orders come in. He's not trying to compete with the ACA 500 Plus and sell it at half a dozen different Amiga stores. That's not the point. He has a specific market in mind, and the people in that specific market can respect the quality of workmanship that goes into this product and the idea behind it, and suddenly price is not as much of an issue. So what does this card need, in my humble opinion? Because nothing is absolutely perfect right out of the box. Now, number one, it has to have auto booting. I mean, but that's already being addressed. By this time in 3 or 4 months, every last one of them is probably going to be auto booting, and it won't even be a concern, but it needs to auto boot. Having 512K or a megabyte of non-volatile RAM on there to store an actual Kickstart image, that would be awesome. That would be incredible. Completely eliminating the need for a Kickstart ROM switch or a Kickstart disk. And it can be done because every other accelerator that's out there does it just fine. You don't want to go crazy and start adding accelerators and IDE headers and things like this, because then the beautiful form factor starts to dissipate because you have to add on and add on and add on, and suddenly it's not so pretty anymore. So I think with a couple of little additions like that, this could be a perfect device. So should you put in an order for one of these for yourself? That all depends. It absolutely needs to go on your short list of options if you're looking at upgrading your Amiga 1000. If you're a traditionalist who loves Amiga OS 1.3 and wants to keep your Amiga 1000 as pristine and original as possible, but still have some cool features and some cool capabilities, this is an ideal investment for you. Easy to use, ideal investment. David himself said it very eloquently. He told me the Parserio hits the sweet spot when it comes to completing the Amiga 1000 without taking away her soul. Think about that. I would like to thank David Dunkley very much for answering my questions about the card. He was very prompt, and from everything I'm read, he's very prompt in responding to everybody, which is really cool. I'd also like to thank Adam Fritsch for loaning me this card. He's heading out of the country for the military, and he lent me this card and another product I'll be doing a review on soon. So thanks, buddy. I appreciate that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention my awesome patrons. Thank you guys so much for your continued support. Look at these guys. These people are fantastic. How could you get any cooler than this? If you're interested in making it onto this prestigious list and supporting the show, pop on over to patreon.com/10mark. Little as $2 a month, you're in like Flynn. Please like and subscribe, comment below, tell me how you have upgraded your Amiga 1000 or what you'd like to do to upgrade your Amiga 1000. Love to hear from you guys. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.